Welcome back, everybody, to Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast. This is your host, Cade Nadsett. And how about the Milwaukee Brewers after that series with the Chicago Cubs? Right now enjoying their largest lead of the season at 5 games. Actually bumped the Chicago Cubs down into third place in the division. Have a new second-place team in the St. Louis Cardinals that have moved up. They continue to play some hot baseball. Ended up losing that first game to the Cincinnati Reds. But they have picked it up right where they kind of left off when they had won 8 out of 10 games and won the last 2 games of the series against the Cincinnati Reds. So they're continuing to be a little bit of a scare right now. Brewers, obviously against that team this year, the Cardinals they've taken care of business for the most part. I mean, almost swept them in that 4-game series over Mother's Day. Only that one Mother's Day game away from getting the sweep. And that was a very close game, and then, of course, swept them earlier this season in St. Louis on the road. So that they've really been playing very well against that team, and really, Brewers have been playing very well against divisional teams so far this season. So, like I said, really good series against the Chicago Cubs that we'll talk about here, and end up taking 3 out of 4 from the Cubs. And really, boy, does it feel good to kind of give it back and beat Craig Counsell after he left the Brewers to join the Chicago Cubs. I think I talked about this in my last episode a bit. Like I said, I really do understand both sides of his decision. Now, I do think that, like I said, I think it was a little bit more frustrating from the fan base standpoint for the Milwaukee Brewers to see him leave to the rival Chicago Cubs out of any team. I think if, like I said, he would have gone to like the Rockies or some other team in the American League that was searching for a manager position to fulfill, I think I would have been more than okay with that, especially understanding considering he got offered more money. But the fact that he went to the Chicago Cubs is just a little bit of a knife in the side, it feels like. Definitely doesn't feel great knowing that he's on another team and basically competing against us day by day in the division. So definitely stinks on this side, but boy, does it feel good to have taken 3 out of 4 and really just see a lot of the frustration that he's going through right now. Cubs as a whole, Brewers realistically kind of played them at the right time. They've really been struggling here as of late, and the Milwaukee Brewers made sure to continue that trend after they're leaving Milwaukee. So with that, we're just going to kind of dive into what we saw from some of the games. I've got some big things and keys to talk about here towards the end. And then, of course, as usual, the matchups that we have coming up after this. But let's start with Tuesday. We talked about the Monday game, Memorial Day, on the last episode, kind of covered that. So if you didn't get a chance to hear what went on there or just see what some of my thoughts were on that game, please go back and of course, listen to that last episode. Get a chance to see what we were talking about in that one. But Tuesday, second game of the series, we get Freddie Peralta gets the call on the bump for the Milwaukee Brewers going up against the Chicago Cubs' Ben Brown. And really good rookie for the Chicago Cubs. He's been really fantastic so far this season. He shows that high-velocity fastball. And what I was saying is, in the last episode, is if the Brewers can play off of his, get some hits off of his fastball, usually he's a very high fastball usage pitcher. And was kind of hoping that the Brewers would have some better luck, and I really did think that they had some opportunities. But Ben Brown, got to tip your hat to him. He did a nice job in this one. He was able to command the off-speed pitch, I think a lot better than what we've seen or what I had seen in some of his past starts and heard about in his past starts. So I think that definitely makes the fastball for any pitcher play a lot better when you're able to land that off-speed pitch consistently for strikes, keep it competitive, have it start in the strike zone and dive outside of the strike zone or whatever it may be. I think Ben Brown did a really good job in this one. Obviously, not much more that he could have done. He goes 7 innings pitched, all no-hit innings. Brewers ended up getting no hit through the 7th inning. He gives up 2 walks and 10 strikeouts, and those 2 walks ended up coming in the same inning. And really kind of an interesting decision, I thought, actually. He was only at about 90, I think it was 93 pitches after 7 innings, and Craig Counsell opts to go to their bullpen in the 8th inning, which has been a little bit of a struggle for them this season. Probably the biggest struggle has been that bullpen. Right now, definitely going through some offensive issues, but seemed like they maybe kind of started to come out of those struggles offensively here in this series. But definitely the bullpen continues to struggle. We kind of saw that through this series for sure. So yeah, definitely an interesting decision. I thought we saw some of those same kind of decisions when Craig Counsell was a manager for the Milwaukee Brewers. Just seemed to take some pitchers out when you felt like they had at least one inning, or when a pitcher, even a reliever, they came in and they were rolling to finish out an inning, and they could have continued into the next inning. Just interesting to see him pull these guys when they seem to be doing well. I mean, don't get me wrong, I totally understand trying to keep these guys fresh, trying to continue to be able to utilize their arms on, back-to-back days or something like that. But sometimes in games like these, especially when you've been struggling to win, I think the smarter decision would be to just kind of ride it out and hope that they're able to continue, ride the hot hand, basically. And obviously Ben Brown was doing that in this one. And Freddie Peralta really, going up against Ben Brown, I think he had a pretty good game. He goes 5 2/3 innings, gives up 3 hits on 1 earned run, giving up 2 walks, and 11 strikeouts for Freddie Peralta. So this is a lot more common stat line that we're used to seeing from Freddie Peralta. Typically, he does struggle a little bit to go late in games because he gets in those deep pitch counts, and when he records a lot of strikeouts, obviously that requires you to throw a few more pitches than a pitcher that's coming in and, trying to induce soft contact as opposed to collecting a strikeout. But 3 hits, that's definitely more what we're used to seeing out of Freddie Peralta. Not typically a very high hit type pitcher. Usually doesn't give up too many hits, has a pretty good batting average against on his resume over the last several years that I know I've talked about earlier. But yeah, he just gave up 1 home run to Michael Busch in the 3rd inning, which really I didn't even think was a bad pitch. It just kind of looked like Michael Busch was sitting, first pitch curveball. Freddie Peralta was just trying to kind of throw a get-me-over curveball. Michael Busch hammered it out to center field, but Freddie Peralta didn't let that bother him. He came right back, striking out Dansby Swanson, and just kind of rolled from there. So obviously those 11 strikeouts, really good to see, just the 1 run given up. So that's only 2 runs across his last 2 starts between the Marlins and the Cubs. So more from what we're used to seeing out of our ace. Definitely a good game, and wish the offense has actually been struggling to pick up runs for him in the last couple games now. Luckily in this one he was not handed the loss like he was in the last one. Ended up getting a no decision, but Brewers were not able to break up the no-hitter until that 8th inning. Sal Frelick had a single up the middle and then ended up escaping that inning. The Cubs pitching was able to do that without giving up any runs. And then Willy Adames, bottom of the 9th inning, with 2 outs down to his last strike with Yelich on second after drawing a walk with 2 outs and then getting a balk to advance him to second. Huge at-bat from Willy Adames, really good at-bat. Wasn't trying to do too much, which I've talked about countless times, and I think this is one thing that we've been able to see from Willy Adames in the last couple weeks when he's been having a lot of success, is he's not trying to swing for the fences every time. He's really shortening up, just trying to put the bat on the ball, and I think when he does that, I think he starts to hit more home runs and just gets better contact in general because his approach is just so much more improved. So he ends up getting a game-tying RBI double, and then things kind of ended up, unfortunately, going wild and unraveling in the 10th inning in extras in Milwaukee. Trevor McGill, he gets injured in the 10th inning off of a line drive from Tauchman for the Chicago Cubs and hit him straight off the throwing arm. And McGill didn't even bother trying to field the ball. I think he was in so much pain that he was worried that, I think from all of our standpoints, I was worried his arm shattered, got fractured, whatever. Or something with the tendon or, really anything. I mean, to get a 100-mile-per-hour ball hit off your throwing arm right in the elbow area is definitely very scary, and even could have hit it so hard that it pretty much, I'm assuming at the point in time, just kind of numbed the whole arm. So, I mean, you can't really blame him for not trying to make a play on the ball. I don't really see what else, he's supposed to do. I'm sure he was in so much pain and just a scary moment nonetheless. For McGill, luckily, for him, it does look like this is not too serious of an injury. At least the MRI showed no fracture and doesn't look like there's any nerve or tendon damage to any extent, so that should be good. Looks like it kind of ended up hitting him right in the meat part of that arm. So hopefully we see him come back in the next few days. Right now, just kind of taking it day by day and seeing where the soreness is at and seeing, how that arm is feeling. Maybe try and get in some throwing days here the next couple days and look to make a comeback. So definitely stinks to see, that happen, but at least in the case scenario that it did happen, we're looking at not too long of an injured list stint, which definitely needs to be avoided with how many injuries we've been dealing with, especially on the pitching side so far here this season. So Milner comes in, can't blame him too much in this spot. He didn't end up getting a chance to warm up, and the Cubs ended up putting up 5 runs in the 10th. Brewers did answer back with 2 in the bottom of the 10th, but not enough to claw back in this one. Cubs win this one 6-3. So all in all, still a pretty good game, still a lot of good things, and very awesome to see the Brewers, even though they were getting no hit in this game, and I've said this many times too, to still be, right there in the game. They were obviously only the 1 run down and ended up tying the game in the 9th, giving themselves a chance. And an unfortunate call at second base. Willy Adames gets called out on what I thought was a little bit of a questionable call. I thought that he was able to sneak that hand in there before Horner got the tag on his chest, but nonetheless, move on to the 10th inning, and the Brewers are not able to wrap this one up. So definitely a tough loss, but we will dive into a couple more of the exciting games here. We got Wednesday, Thursday coming up where the Brewers did bounce back, collect a couple more victories, and a lot of really fun games in these couple games. And really this whole series was just a lot of competitive baseball, a lot of fun, athletic display, from both sides of the ball on both teams, really, and really good atmospheres, it looked like, at American Family Field. Obviously, Monday with the holiday, probably, that was a sellout day, probably by far the best atmosphere the Brewers have had so far this season at the stadium, but otherwise, still some really good showings, it looked like, in the fan bases, and I'm sure a lot of excitement from their standpoints, too, being able to watch these games. So, yeah, Wednesday, Bryce Wilson gets the call for the Brewers going up against the Cubs ace, and to this point, best starter in the MLB, Shota Imanaga, who had an ERA at .84 coming into this one with a record of 5-0. He had been lights out, and especially with the Brewers' struggles against left-handed pitching, you kind of thought that this was going to be a bit of a disastrous offensive game, and especially coming off of that no-hit game, at least going into the 8th inning for the Milwaukee Brewers, the last game that we had just talked about, I was definitely feeling a little bit nervous, a little bit concerned that we were going to have back-to-back days with hardly any offense, but that was not the case at all. Brewers really roughed Imanaga up for the first time that he's been roughed up really all season. Had only given up 5 runs in the month of May, 5 runs over the entirety of the season and only 2 runs in the month of May, and Brewers ended up getting 7 off of him in this game, and only 4 1/3 innings pitched for Imanaga, where he also had 1 walk and 1 strikeout. So Brewers did a really nice job in the approach. Offense was sticking to their ways, and I think another thing that I'm sure some other people have talked about, and maybe people have heard about this, maybe not, but there was a rain delay on the game that he was last scheduled to pitch for Imanaga. That was against the St. Louis Cardinals. I believe it was on the Friday before this where they got rained out, and ended up not deciding to pitch him on Saturday, ended up deciding to give him a few extra days off to be ready for this Brewers series, and I think that really cost him. I think the 10 days off is what he ended up getting. I think creates some rust in the pitchers, creates a little bit of fatigue even, potentially, just not being in the mindset. When you're not pitching consistently, and he had been pitching about every 5 days, which is pretty consistent, obviously, for a starting pitcher. And I think kind of going away from that, I think, is probably what affected him the most. It looked like the splitter location wasn't really there. He was hanging a lot of those splitters up over the middle. Not really known for his velocity, but that splitter and fastball, the four-seam, really play super well off of each other. And it just seemed like he was catching a lot of the plate with both of those pitches. So Brewers, even if they were kind of caught in between pitches, when you leave some over the middle of the plate, they definitely are in a much more hittable position and a much more vulnerable area in the strike zone for the batters to reach. And I think that's what we saw in this one. Luckily, Brewers offense really able to get to him because Bryce Wilson didn't have a great game either in this one. He got roughed up a bit, gave up 6 hits on 3 runs, giving up 2 walks and a strikeout over only 4 innings of work. So really a pretty short outage for Bryce Wilson all told. And we had some bullpen kind of got a little bit risky on this one too. We saw Koenig come in, and Blake Perkins defensively and in this game overall had an amazing game, defensively and offensively. In that 3rd inning alone, he had a home run robbery of Christopher Morel that would have given the Cubs the lead, so huge catch by him out in center field. And then another huge catch, I believe that was that actually might have been the next inning. I don't remember if that was the 4th or 5th inning, but we saw Koenig come in. I guess it would have been the 5th inning considering Wilson went all 4 innings, but we saw Koenig come in the 5th, ended up getting the bases loaded, had already given up a couple of runs on a walk and some hit by pitches, and was really struggling. And Dansby Swanson sent one out to right center field. Looked like it was either destined for the gap or destined to go over the wall. And Blake Perkins tracked it beautifully, timed up his run because he caught the ball just before he bumped into the wall. And I mean, if he would have bumped into the wall before that, obviously there's really no chance of him making that catch. So took off at least 3 runs off the board, which would have tied the game because it was 7-4 at that point. But I was pretty sure it was destined to go over the wall. And I'm sure as we move into these summer months and the warmer it gets with the humidity in the air, usually tends to help the ball carry a little bit better. So I think the late May season and atmosphere probably helped the Brewers out a little bit on that hit. But huge catch and made another amazing diving catch in the 7th inning, did Blake Perkins. And then he also did it on the offense. On the offensive side, he had a double in this game, had a 2-run home run in that same inning that he robbed the home run. We saw Christian Yelich hit a 2-run home run. That one went 441 feet, so pretty incredible bomb off of a left-handed pitcher for Christian Yelich. Good to see him get a couple of hits in there in that game against a lefty. And then Willy Adames, Gary Sanchez, they both have RBI hits and continue to swing a hot bat. So really good to see Willy Adames. He also had a 2-run home run in this one and really kind of put the game out of arm's reach for the Cubs at this point in the 7th inning. But really awesome to see from all standpoints. We saw really good offense in this one. Kind of back and forth a little bit. Cubs kept trying to claw their way back and seemed at times, especially that hit by Dansby Swanson, seemed like it was destined to at least tie the game or give the Cubs the lead at that point. But really nice job by the pitching to kind of make some adjustments. Saw some good innings out of the late bullpen. And just one other thing that still really confuses me. Mitch White comes in the 10th inning, the 9th inning, really a pretty stressless appearance for him. The Brewers come into the 9th inning with a 10-4 lead, and he still surrenders a couple of runs in the 10th. So I really don't believe that Mitch White is the answer. I know the Brewers, I think the management must see something in him, but I'm pretty sure almost every time he's come in, he's been surrendering some runs. ERA is not sitting very good right now, so I just don't think that Mitch White is the answer right now. I understand he's filling in a little bit for some of our injured guys at this moment, but I think once we start to get some of these guys back, DL Hall kind of had a little bit of a setback in his rehab assignment that we'll touch on here after I talk about Thursday's game, which will be pretty quick. But I just don't think that he's the answer in the bullpen. I don't think he's really shown too good of stuff. He hasn't pitched well, that is, with any consistency of any standpoint. So I think we need to see some change. Maybe, put him out, send him down to AAA, let him get some work in down there, or even just designating him for assignment and trying to find another piece. I just think we're going to need to add on to what's already been a pretty good bullpen for the most part, all told. But I think they're going to have to add some pieces to kind of solidify that bullpen. So really big win for them on Wednesday. They win that one 10-6. And then Thursday, Brewers do collect a win in the final game of this 4-game set. We see Rhea come in. He has another really good start. So that makes it 2 in a row for him as well. He goes 5 innings pitched, gives up 5 hits on 5 strikeouts, and surrenders a walk and just the 1 run allowed. So really nice job from Rhea. That's, like I said, 2 starts in a row where he's been able to give us at least 5 innings of work. He's not allowed too many runs, doing a nice job limiting the walks, especially on this one with only the 1, and still collecting those 5 strikeouts. So I think Rhea's kind of back, hopefully after a couple of rough outings, back to his ways. Hopefully he was able to work on some things with the training staff and able to work some hiccups out that maybe he was having in his motion or just in his release point, whatever it was. But good to see him have another good outing. And then we see Jameson Taillon on the bump for the Chicago Cubs, and Brewers able to get to him offensively. They put up 3 runs over 6 innings of work, collecting 6 hits and give up 1 walk, did Taillon, while striking out 4 along the way. So definitely an improvement from what we saw from Taillon earlier in the season when the Brewers faced him in Chicago. He ended up throwing 6 innings of no-run baseball. I know we had talked about that in one of the previous episodes that saw the Brewers strike out 7 times while he was on the mound in that one. So really nice job for the Milwaukee Brewers offense to bounce back. Maybe some of the guys were still a little bit fresh on what they saw last time, making adjustments on what they saw last time, and able to do some good things. Ended up putting all 3 runs up in that second inning, but had some pressure on in some of the other innings and was able to get him out after just 6 innings of work. So nice job by the offense making some adjustments and able to at least get a little bit and get some insult to injury for him missing some locations and whatnot with that. So we see Adames and Sanchez offensively. They have big days again. Adames collects another 2 hits to give him a 9-game hit streak, which has been his biggest so far this season. And Sanchez, he ends up finishing with 3 RBIs with that big hit coming after a lot of back-and-forth baseball. It was 1-0 Cubs at one point, went to 3-1 Brewers. Seiya Suzuki tied it up in the 7th with the home run off of Brian Hudson, which really this has been the only outing this year where Brian Hudson has struggled. Ended up giving up a home run to Morel in the 8th inning after the Brewers took the lead in the bottom of the 7th inning. So it was 4-4 going into this bottom of the 8th, and Gary Sanchez in a 3-2 count with the go-ahead run at third hits a go-ahead 2-run home run. Second time we've seen that from him in the 8th inning. So he has really kind of changed my mind on what I had talked about with him earlier in the season. He's been a really good piece, a really good addition, and he's hitting with a lot more consistency. And not only is it coming off of left-handed pitching, he's hitting righties just as well, too, for the most part. So really good to have him have some success, and just another really impressive bat that's kind of impressed me that I didn't really expect to have a breakout year or have too good of a year. So really good to see that from him, and definitely some other guys that we're going to talk about here as we wrap up, specifically one guy in Blake Perkins that I want to talk about here. But that pretty much wraps up the games against the Chicago Cubs. So overall, a really good series. Brewers, like I said, walk away with their largest lead in the division so far this season, so that's really nice to have spaced ourselves, at least for the time being. They reached 10 games above 500 for the first time, so that's been really exciting to see them at that point. And yeah, with that, I just want to swing in a couple of big keys that I want to talk about here. Brewers ended up wrapping up. They're about a third of the way through the season with a 32-22 record right now, or 33-23. That puts us at 56 games. So you're looking at right around about a third way through the season at 162 for the whole year. So right about at that third of the way point. And I mean, all told, like I've talked about this before, I think this has really surprised me. I think the Brewers have been a lot more impressive than I anticipated them to be, and I'm definitely not going to complain about that. But I think that's been really exciting to see a lot of unexpected things that we've seen, and out of a lot of unexpected people. Adames is honestly, for me, one of those guys. In the last couple years, he's had some struggles after that first season in 2021 when he came over to the Brewers. That second half of the year, he was pretty stellar all the way through. But the last couple years, we've seen some consistent struggles. And even this year, I will admit that he's struggled a little bit. But I think his change in approach, for the most part, has been really successful. I think the batting stance helps. I think it kind of keeps his hands back and keeps him not so out in front of the off-speed stuff, which we've seen a little bit here. But even when he was going through that rough patch that I was just talking about in the last couple episodes, I think what I really do think is he's had a better approach. I still think, the strikeout rate's down, the walk rate is up. So those two things, to me, are really important in your overall approach, from a at-bat to at-bat standpoint. And batting average hovering about 260, OPS up to 796 during this 9-game stretch. So definitely bumping up those numbers in the recent times. But even when he was struggling, for the most part, he was able to get some pretty consistent barrels, just trying to... Still, I do think he was trying to do too much. I think he was trying to swing for the fences. And I mean, I can't fault guys too much. Obviously, hitting home runs is really fun. But in those run-producing situations, for me, is what's most important, that you need to shorten up. All you're trying to do is hit a sacrifice fly or really just put the ball in play. And he's currently sitting at 39 RBIs for the season, so still doing a really good job in that run-producing role. Better than he was doing last year, at least, kind of hitting in that spot. So, I don't know. I still think there's some improvement potentially for Adames. There's always improvement in a lot of these players, but I really do think that he's doing really well. And I do think when Adames is going good, I think the entire team kind of feeds off of that. And I think overall as a player, with his attitude, his energy that he brings on a day-by-day basis, I think he's really good, and he's a really good piece of this team. And when he's playing well on the field, that only just brings more good things, I think, to the entirety of the team. So good to see that out of him lately. And right now, actually really picking up pretty well. Contreras right now, we've seen him cool down over the last few series. And it makes you wonder, I don't know, we've talked about this before, and this especially we've seen with catchers in the past, really across the entire MLB, is a lot of times catchers have really hot starts to the season, and they end up cooling down because fatigue really starts to set in. You're out there every day and catching gear, and you're doing a lot of things, controlling the game behind home plate, calling pitches, using your arm basically on every pitch, throwing it back to the pitcher, and you're doing a lot of stuff, and sitting, crouching down in the catcher position, you just get a lot of fatigue. It wears on your body. And I never personally caught when I used to play in Little League and through middle school in those ages, but even then I think it started to fatigue a lot of the young players, and I can't imagine doing it on a day-by-day basis over, so far it's been over the course of 2 months for Contreras, and let alone he looks at the calendar and realizes that he's got to do this for another 4 months still, and hopefully another 5 considering the Brewers make a postseason run. But I do think that this is potential, that fatigue is starting to set in, obviously with him leading the MLB in blasts, which I still have yet to dig into that a little bit, which is an offensive statistic kind of comparing barrels and bat speed. So he's got one of the better swings in the MLB, but I think just right now, hopefully able to get out of this funk. And I think that his approach is very good. I just think he's kind of pulling off the off-speed stuff a little bit. I think his opposite field approach right now has gone down a little bit, so hopefully he's able to bring that back and start hitting with some more consistency. Because if we can get both of these guys going and Christian Yelich all in that top, run-producing role and table setters part of the lineup, I don't know how you get through this lineup without putting up 4 or 5 runs a game, which the Brewers have pretty much done for the most part this season, which has been a big improvement. So just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think that's a little bit interesting and just does bring up that question. Is there fatigue setting in a little bit in the catcher's position that's causing this cool down at the plate? And you never know, really. So I think another thing, after a third way through the season, just kind of a big thing to recap, I think starting pitching, Brewers are going to need to find somebody. I think Jesus Luzardo, actually, on the Miami Marlins, I know I talked about him. I do think with the Miami Marlins struggling, I think there's going to be a big possibility to claim him. And actually in this upcoming series, we'll talk about this as we wrap up, as we usually do. But tonight, Brewers face the Eric Fed for the Chicago White Sox, and I think he's another guy that would be an interesting addition. He's got an ERA below 3 right now, 4-1 record. And for him to be pitching with a team that's really been struggling, I think, having a good offense behind him, that's been what's really been struggling for the White Sox is their offense this year. I think putting together a strong offense behind him and picking up a guy like that only makes those pitchers better and makes them more comfortable on the mound. So I think something like that, making a midseason pickup, could really help. We're obviously hoping to get Jacob Junis as he's on the rise to making a return. Like I said, DL Hall ended up having a minor setback. He ended up landing weird on the mound in one of his rehab assignment games and potentially caused another knee injury that he's dealt with previously in his career a little bit. So hopefully that's not the case, but definitely a possibility that we're going to see him on the injured list maybe for another short stint here. Obviously, we got Tobias Myers going tonight, Robert Gazer. Those 2 young guys have really filled in well in the starting rotation, and they've been really lights out for the most part, and they need to continue to fill in those roles right now and kind of solidify, hopefully, their spots in the rotation. I think it's really good to have some young pieces, also have some veteran pieces in Freddie Peralta and Colin Rea on the mound. And then I guess you could say kind of Bryce Wilson, who's also kind of new to this position. He definitely was a starting pitcher with the Pittsburgh Pirates, but he's been out of the bullpen for the Brewers the last couple seasons. So definitely need to have these guys continue to fill in those roles if the Brewers are going to continue the success that they've been on. On the flip side, offensively, we should see Rhys Hoskins returning here pretty soon. He'll be a big bet to add to the lineup. Might even see him here this weekend, which would be really nice. Good to see that he's not landing on the injured list for too long, and definitely not landing on the injured list as long as Yelich did. So good to see that from that standpoint. So really just one other guy that I want to talk about. Give some praise to this guy. Had an outstanding game that we already talked about in that Wednesday matchup against the Chicago Cubs, but Blake Perkins continues to be outstanding, continues to really surprise myself and I'm sure a lot of the other fan base. And as much as, it hurts me to say this, I think Yelich getting injured is probably the best thing that could have happened for Blake Perkins. I think it really opened up his allowance to get some more playing time and allowed him to really thrive in the position at center field. With Christian Yelich being out for almost a month and for having that much time off, Blake Perkins really filled in, got to see the field at a more consistent rate and did an excellent job, and that's exactly why Pat Murphy continues to go to him. I think it's going to be really interesting when we see Garrett Mitchell return for the Milwaukee Brewers. He's nearing his return here probably in the next month or so. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Blake Perkins will probably primarily play center field. The way that he's playing defensively and also adding to the offense with his bat, I don't see how you can really take him out. I think if anybody that's kind of on the chopping block for seeing less time on the field would probably have to be Jackson Chourio at this point, unless we see him, kind of figure it out and get on the jet stream here and put up some better offensive numbers and even continue to figure out some things out in right field defensively. So it'll be interesting. It might be kind of a good teaching point for Chourio to see some more bench time and give him some time to think about and just kind of watch. I don't think there's anything wrong with players getting time on the bench and just kind of watching what helps other players, what kind of consistencies they get into from warming up and whatnot. And some on-field activities, maybe doing some extra work, taking fly balls or getting some extra BP practice, whatever it is. But I think he's kind of at that point. But back to Blake Perkins, I think he's been incredible. He's been probably one of the best center fielders so far this season. He just makes everything look so easy and effortless, and he continues to rake pretty well. Went through a little bit of a stretch there at the plate where he was struggling, but looks like he's kind of getting back into his groove, and hopefully he's able to continue that as we move into the next couple weeks for sure. So, yeah, that kind of wraps up everything that I wanted to talk about with those big key takeaways, just some things in the recent times that have kind of been sticking out to me, especially after this series. So we will talk about here to wrap up. We're going to talk about, like we usually do, what the Brewers moving up into the next series here starting tonight against the White Sox. Brewers will host the Chicago White Sox in this 3-game set over the weekend. And right now, this is a time that the Brewers need to keep their foot on the gas, don't take anything off, especially with the Cardinals kind of creeping up. It makes me worried that they could continue to kind of stay hot and keep their ways up. They've definitely got the roster for it. So I think that's a little bit of a cause for concern for these Brewers to keep the gas on the pedal, especially against this Chicago White Sox team. They currently hold the worst record in the major leagues at 15-42. So Brewers really need to just take advantage of this. They need to win at least 2 out of 3, I think, at a minimum. And if not, it would be obviously excellent to see them take advantage and take a sweep. We're going to see the Brewers call on Tobias Myers in today's outing. We'll see Robert Gazzer, who continues to be outstanding, and he'll be making his 5th start of his career. And so far, 4 out of 5 of those been at home, and he's pitched very well at home. So hopefully he's able to continue that before calling on fastball Freddie Peralta to wrap up the series on Sunday against the Chicago White Sox. So I think Tobias Myers is going to be interesting. Hopefully he is able to continue his hot ways, been pitching pretty well, ended up coming out of the bullpen again in that Miami Marlins series, and then we saw him pitch pretty well against the Boston Red Sox in that most recent outing for him. So hopefully he's able to continue that and kind of fill in this role in the starting rotation that the Brewers need to this point right now. So and it'll be another critical time after this. The Brewers move on to play Philadelphia, who currently holds the best record in Major League Baseball with 39 wins. So definitely going to be a little bit of a reversion against, besides facing the Chicago White Sox, you go from facing the worst team at home to facing the best team on the road. So going to be an interesting series, potential playoff matchup later on in the season with the Phillies. So we'll see where that takes us. But I think obviously don't want to jump too far ahead. Brewers need to keep their foot on the gas. And like I said, at least get a series win against the Chicago White Sox here coming up this weekend. So yeah, so with that kind of wraps up everything I wanted to talk about. As you guys know, Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast is always available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other mainstream podcast sites. So please feel free to listen to this podcast from wherever it is you may like in the future. I can always be reached on social media using @brew_pod on Twitter or by searching Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast on Facebook or Instagram. And so, yeah, with that, hopefully you guys have a good weekend. Should be some decent weather here in Wisconsin. Looks like we might get a little bit of rain tomorrow. Hopefully not, or at least hopefully not too much or for an extended portion of the day. But if you guys get a chance, get outside, enjoy some of that beautiful weather, and hopefully we see the Brewers win a couple more games and hopefully maybe even get a sweep to really put a cap off on what would be their by far best homestand so far this season. So with that, we'll see you guys next time. Talk to you soon. And of course, go Brewers.